welcome to this week's episode. This week I got a letter from Kay, and she writes, "Dear Natalie, I love getting outdoors, but I tend to get wrapped up and stressed out by everyday life. Then I get home and just want to put on my PJs and curl up with a book. I really need to get back to my old habit of walking 3 or 4 miles a day, and I need to know, how do I find the motivation?" So I'm going to geek out a little bit because I really dig motivation. Here's the thing. Motivation's this weird process. We tend to think of it as this concrete something, right? Either you have motivation or you don't. Or I guess sometimes we tend to think of it as a quality. Either you are motivated or you aren't. And that's not exactly realistic. That's not how we work as humans, especially when it comes to something that we really value. A change that we know we really need to make. So let me back up. Motivation actually even starts before we know we want to make the change. So with Kay, who had this awesome habit at one point of walking 3 or 4 miles a day, which is like a super duper amount of steps a day. Go Kay. Her motivation to do that started before she even realized it was important to her. So there's a theory, and I won't bore the crap out of you, but this theory says that motivation happens in stages. And the very first stage is not thinking that you have to do anything different at all. They call that pre-contemplation, which is a really philosophical way to put it. I am pre-contemplating making any change to my behavior. So in a way, it's kind of cool. I find it actually motivational to think that when I'm in the process of even considering doing something different, like considering exercising more, considering getting out there and walking 3 or 4 miles a day, when normally I've been spending the evenings after work in my PJs reading a book, if I'm even considering it, I'm already in a further stage of change beyond the first one. The first one is thinking nothing has to change at all. But then after that, we go into this series of more aware stages, right? So after we decide, oh, maybe this is something I want to do, we have this period of ambivalence. So there's this stage of change where we're kind of on the fence. We're thinking, okay, maybe I want to get out there and walk 3 or 4 miles a day, and maybe I don't. I can kind of argue both sides. Finally, we're able to hit the points, and this all happens pretty naturally. Of course, there's things you can do to make the stages happen quicker. But even if you don't try, most of us go through these stages. Even if it takes 20 years, we go through them. So once you're finally sold on taking action and making this change, there are things you can do to build your motivation. Make sure that this is a change that you can sustain over a longer term. So it sounds like this is where Kay is. She's at this point where she knows she wants to make the change. And in fact, she does do this healthy behavior every so often. It's just some nights she really finds her heart isn't in it. Sounds like she's saying, what can I do when my heart isn't in it to rev my heart back up? And there are a few things we can do. The very first one is to think about why this matters. It's harder for us to blow off a new healthy behavior when it ties into our values in some way. So if I don't care about something, like if I'm trying to, for who knows what reason, but let's say I'm trying to like wear more pink. I don't really have a deep personal connection to the color pink. So it'll be really easy for me to just chuck that resolution aside. I mean, it doesn't matter. It has no real world impact. It doesn't reflect on me as a person, and it doesn't tie into my values in any way. So the flip of this is true too. If I want to change a behavior and I can somehow make it tie into my values and the things that are really important to me, I'm more likely to reconsider those moments when I want to chuck the behavior aside. So for Kay, that's going to mean identifying what matters most to her. Maybe one of the things she values the most is health. Maybe it's energy. Maybe it's independence. Maybe it's nature. She probably could come up with 1,000 things that are more accurate for her. But for you, if you have the same problem, think about the things you really value. And then think about how this new healthy behavior connects to those. It'll be harder for you to convince yourself to stay home and read a book if it means overlooking something that really matters. Another cool trick, I guess, well, it's not really a trick, but I like to think of it as a trick because then I'm a magician. Anyway, okay, so another thing you can do is what's called a cost-benefit analysis. And I promise it's not nearly as dry and boring as it sounds, and there's no accounting involved. So you've heard of a pros cons list. It's basically one column of the cool things about the new behavior and one column about the bad things with that new behavior. A cost-benefit analysis is essentially a pros and cons list on steroids. Note briefly, don't use steroids. They're drugs and drugs are bad. But a cost-benefit analysis is a pros and cons list times 2. So we tend to think, okay, so I want to walk 3 or 4 miles a day. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? It actually is deeper than that. The way our brain works is, what are the benefits of walking 3 or 4 miles? What are the drawbacks of it? What are the benefits of staying home in my PJs and reading a book? What are the drawbacks of that? Our brains are big and beautiful and complex, and one simple pros and cons list isn't going to cut it. So do this exercise. Do the pros and cons of the healthy behavior and the pros and cons of the status quo. Do both. The thing is, you already know what the costs and benefits are, but seeing them on paper somehow makes it real. And it's easier to meditate on that cost-benefit analysis when it's written down and use it as a way to motivate yourself out of the status quo behavior and into the new healthy behavior. Also, this wouldn't be an Adventuresome Women and Camping for Women enterprise if I didn't mention a little bit of self-love. Women in particular, we're really sucky at this. We're really good at recognizing other people's wonderful qualities, and we tend to really suck at recognizing our own. One of the easiest and arguably the most beautiful way to keep a positive change going is to affirm yourself for that change. And so there's a lot of different ways to affirm yourself. You could do the Stuart Smalley, like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people like me. Gosh darn it, people like me. You could do that. You can also reward yourself when you do make it out there. You can also change the self-talk that you use and the thoughts you think about this new behavior. So what I mean by that is we tend to default to the negative. We tend to think, oh, I want to be walking 3 or 4 miles a night, and tonight I only walked 2 miles. I'm such a loser. What if we flipped that? And what if we said instead, wow, you know what? Tonight I met 50% of my mileage goal, or 75% of my mileage goal, or whatever it may be. I am not a mathematician. But that's a more affirming, more motivational way of framing it. So rather than downing yourself for not meeting the full goal, affirm yourself for meeting what you did meet. And that gives you the motivation to press harder next time. And of course, really nice messages to yourself where you'll see them like on your mirror or in your car or on your fridge or whatever. Those are nice too. Even if you find that they're not particularly the most powerful in motivating you to get out and walk or exercise more, it's still a really nice thing to tell yourself that you're loved regularly. That's about all I got this week, and it looks like my video this week is a little long, but that's just because I love motivation so much. I'd like to motivate you some way, somehow, to send us your questions. I'm really interested in hearing from you. You guys write wonderful letters. You're funny, you're engaging, you're smart, and I'd like to feature your questions. Send them my way, asknataliecolumn@gmail.com. I'll see you next week. Bye.